So, guys, today we've got Hamish Rodgers-Wilson. He's the owner of Australian Home Brewing. They are a company that produces and distributes home brewing technology as well as home brewing products. Hamish, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Tim. Great to be here.
Fantastic.
Thanks for having me. What a great view we've got out here of Albert Park Lake and the Port Phillip Bay.
It is glorious. It is glorious. It's a much better view of than what these cameras have.
I wonder if I could rent this joint off you during the Grand Prix.
I think so. $4,000 a night, right?
I'm not sure. That's right.
Mate, really good to have you here. I think I'd love to dig into a little bit of background and find out exactly what Australian Home Brewing does. Can you give the audience a bit of a background on that?
Yeah, so our business essentially sells beer, spirit, winemaking products, all sorts of products to make drinks, but essentially it's hardcore DNA is in beer, and we sell essentially everything, all the equipment, all the ingredients, and everything you need to make any kind of beer you like. So what we call it small batch brewing, really. Yeah.
What's the most popular beer that you guys distribute? I'd be very interested to understand what the market's doing, because we've had this enormous shift, especially amongst independent brewers, across the pale ales and more hoppy products. But then you look at the traditional Australian beer, and it's lager. You know what I mean? Yeah. So what's the most popular one that you see in the home brewing market?
Oh, that's a really good question, Tim. So in the last couple of years, we've seen all sorts of changes and trends. We've got some really good data on this sort of stuff if we want to get into that sort of technical side of it. But what's really seems to be exploding in the last year or two are hazies. People are loving the concept of hazies. There's what we do. We do a lot of sort of what we call recipe packs. So people buy completed recipes. We call it craft beer in a box. Yep. And we've got all sorts of tools where people can select their favourite styles and so on, and it gives us this data. But the hazies are exploding. IPAs are really popular, and depending on seasonality, right now we're in winter, so lagers and pilsners, because they're low temperature fermenting products, but they don't sell really in summer. But also, if we think about the commercial market, like VB, like it's an enormous beer and it's got a huge audience. So we've also got products that really sit in that wheelhouse, and they're massively popular as well. But where the real explosion in growth has been over probably even it's a 10-year trend, has been that craft side. So people will go to Dan Murphy's, or they go to the local pub, they'll try something, and then they'll come in and say, I really want to make that. How do we make that? What kind of hops do they use? So all of the products that any brewery can access, we can also access the same products, but we, if you like, get it down to like 20-litre batches. Yep. So malt, hops, yeast and water. It's a very simple formula, but you can make literally hundreds of styles of beer very easily. Yeah.
Talking about hazy, so I lived in America in 2005, and so the first time I went to the States was, I think it was 2003, and then I went back to move there in 2005, and I feel like hazies were enormous over there in the States, and certainly when I travelled through the South, I travelled in Memphis and Little Rock, Arkansas, and it was all hazies. So you go to one of the pubs, or one of the, they call them bars there, and there's 40 different taps, and I think 20 or 25 of those taps were those really hazy, you couldn't see through the beer type of products. Is that a uniquely American thing that's kind of come across here?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know, but what I do know about that is that, hazies have been around for a long time. You think about Belgian wheat beers; they're effectively a hazy beer. So it really has got a lot to do with the wheat content. It's got the high protein, creates sort of a haze, if you like. So they've been around for a long time. But in terms of IPAs and sort of juicy XPAs, that's a term that's used a lot now. It refers to fruit, but they can often be hazy as well. Yeah, you would imagine that a lot of those trends have come from the US. and we do pick them up generally pretty quickly. Of course, we've started our own trends with brewers like Stone and Wood, who have come up with the concept of Pacific Ales using Australian hops and that sort of thing, and that's another very popular style of beer that people like to make.
What's the difference between that and an IPA, for example?
Well, I guess the IPA. Well, there's in terms of IPA effectively means India Pale Ale, which the traditional IPA was a British style beer, which was used or drunk in British India back in the 1800s, and traditionally it was a very high alcohol content beer.
I trust that to come from the Brits.
yeah, that's right. But I guess it also helped with preserving it in the hot climate and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So these days, when people refer to IPAs, more often than not, they're talking about generally American style or even what we call perhaps even Australian style beers, which are generally higher hopped in content and will have... they'll be higher in alcohol. There'll be a lot more malt and so on in the beer. But I guess the malt balances out with the hops, and that's an ideal type of IPA. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Your background, you've obviously had a couple of different careers in your life, and I'd love to learn kind of how you got here. I think that everyone's got their story to tell, and everyone gets to where they are in a very, very different way. Yeah. I never dreamed that I would be in technology, even 4 years ago. So, and my journey to technology was one that it would not be a standard journey to technology. So I'd love to understand a little bit more about your journey and kind of how you got to be doing what you're doing.
Well, this business, Australian Home Brewing, was actually a business owned by my father. And as a kid, I used to come in and do some holiday work and pack malt and pack hops and unbox Cooper's cans and things like that. I have a lot of great memories about that. And of course, Dad would bring the stuff home and I'd start brewing it. And I was very popular because I always had beer on hand and no one else could afford to buy beer. But that wasn't really my career at that point. And I went off, did a lot of traveling and various other things. But to cut a long story short, I had a background in AFL Clubland and also at the AFL itself. And in fact, I worked with your uncle.
You did?
Yeah, I did, Andrew. And
which clubs did you? Which club did you work at?
I worked at Hawthorn, so I was part of Operation Payback. People are old enough to remember. Would remember that there was a proposed merger between Hawthorn and Melbourne back in the 90s. And
was that during the Joseph Goodnick era?
It was. Well, Joseph Goodnick came after that period, but so he helped save Melbourne Football Club, and Hawthorn Football Club also helped save Melbourne Football Club by voting no to the merger. So it didn't happen. We didn't get any thanks on grand final day thank you Hawthorn for making sure that we still exist as a football club. And so I worked with Don Scott and the volunteers, and we helped save the club, and they ended up going into the membership department after the vote went through as a no back in 96, 97. And anyway, that pathway led me into the AFL, and I spent some years at the AFL working and in corporate, in the sort of the corporate and sponsorship area, just always had the idea that I'd probably like to work for myself. Mm-hmm. And it was an opportunity, and I ended up purchasing the business off my father, so I've been in it for quite a while. So that's sort of
for sure
a short story on the journey. But nothing can prepare you like small business, like actually. Diving into a small business.
Yeah, there's an enormous shift from managing large corporate relationships where you're dealing with people who, when it's not in fact their business, and it's not your business, but you're maintaining
money to spend.
There's a lot of money to spend. There's a lot of money on entertainment to spend, especially in I know from that industry. My family's been my father and my uncle both been in that industry in football for they were for a lot of years, and there's a lot of that entertainment dollar that gets spun around.
Yes.
So it's vastly different to owning your own small business.
It's something that I do miss, I have to admit.
Yep.
But so we're in a different space now, and it's a really happy space to work in, and it's a good place to be.
And what's been your opinion of running a small business? My feeling is that in Australia they tend to make it pretty difficult, and I don't think it's a very appealing small market for small business owners to go into. I think that it's very highly taxed and regulated, and I think that the ATO really gets stuck into people when they haven't got spare money to pay outstanding. So I'd love to learn a little bit about your journey as a small business owner. And I think it's a really good lesson for people to learn.
Yeah, I think we're pretty fortunate. I mean, yes, it's very tough. It's hard out there. There's a lot of competition and so on. But there's also, I mean, there's never been a time when we've had more opportunity for growth than now in the last few years. Obviously, the internet's been an amazing help to that. But certainly during the lockdown, where a lot of businesses would have suffered, we just went the complete opposite way. So there's obviously the government kicked in a lot for business, and I think they did a pretty remarkable job for small business. I mean, not a perfect job, but who could ask for perfection during this period?
I would I'd tend to agree with you. During the last couple of years or thereabouts, I think I think they did a spectacular job, to be honest.
Yeah.
I still don't think the environment is as good as some other places, but I do think that the way that they funded businesses in the last couple of years was really good. It was the money was in the right spots.
Yeah. So look, it's so important. I'm not thinking that I would have all the answers, but from my own selfish point of view, our business did very well during, and I know our industry in general did pretty well, particularly those that were set up for online
e-commerce. Yep.
And it's probably worth having a little chat about that. But when the first lockdown happened, I'll never forget the day that Daniel Andrews announced. I think it was a Sunday, that everything was going to be locked down on the Tuesday, and you had 24 hours, and it was beyond panic buying, and we've never seen anything like it. And during that sort of that next 3 or 4 month period, we were just breaking records every single day, and it was all around bricks and mortar retail was completely shut, but people kept doing click and collect, even though they could only come 5 kilometres, and then suddenly parcels were just going everywhere all around Australia. So our major problem was actually keeping up with the demand. Our systems were groaning because we had never experienced this kind of demand, and it ended up becoming quite a thing to manage. But learning through all of this, and I guess this is also part of our DNA as a business, that we love our customers, and we pretty much get a lot of love back as well. And I think a lot of that's just got to do with basic communication. So during that period, we were running up to 2 weeks behind just being able to get parcels out. There were so many there, we just couldn't get them, and we were running 7-day shifts. But we kept our communication up as much as we possibly could, and we ended up coming out of it pretty unscathed from that customer relations point of view. And that's not anything to do with beer or brewing. That's just to do with
service.
Business.
Yeah. How did you scale during that period? Obviously, you guys went, record after record after record. How did you need to scale your staff? Did you need to scale your procurement of products and that type of thing? I know that from the start of COVID to the end of COVID was a different story, and even now, we've got. I don't even want to start with the supply chain issues. We can cover that later. But how did you as a business scale? Did you have to scale with human beings, or did you scale systems, or?
That's a really good question. In fact, so when we talk about human beings, well, the first thing I don't. It's probably hard to even remember now. I remember walking down the beach and getting too close to people who weren't, even though they were wearing masks, and thinking, "Oh, geez, why don't you just stand back?" Like we were. So we had staff, some older staff that had been with us for a long time, that just didn't want to come to work. They were worried about basically getting the thing and not living through it. So we actually lost staff, and then we were also very nervous about getting new people in because we didn't know who they were or where they were living, and so we were only able to work with trusted people. And I think that happened to a lot of businesses, but it was certainly ours. In terms of scale, we're lucky enough to have a warehouse that could hold a lot of product, and we were able to bring in a lot of product. We had some good intel on, some lines of sight on the stock and what was coming in, what was coming off the containers. And I guess we were able to adapt. We were set up well enough to be able to adapt to the supply chain problems, and we had massive problems, but it almost worked to our advantage because we were better off than pretty much all of our competitors. So the scaling came from just looking at our systems and what can we do to get the parcels out quicker, to be more responsive to our customers, to be able to communicate better with our customers. So we did that, but in hindsight now, I think what we were developing was coping mechanisms, not like lockdown strategy, because we were just so busy. So it's only even now that we're able to take a breath that we're really going back into that strategy piece. But so I think we just developed coping mechanisms. We're pretty good at doing that, but we were run off our feet. Yeah.
What's you spoke about systems and scaling systems. What systems do you use in your business? So you've obviously got something for accounting, you've got something for your stock, you've got something for your actual distribution itself, you've got something for your transport, logistics, etc.
Yeah.
Can you run me through all the systems that you use in your business?
Well, we have a sort of pretty simple setup. So we use Neato, which is an Australian-based software.
I know Neato.
That you'd probably be aware of. So our website, Australian Home Brewing. .com.au. That's we've actually just given a little bit of a refresh, but that's on the Neato platform, and it's pretty user friendly. Our POS point of sale system is within Neato itself, and all our shipping is connected to the couriers or Australia Post via Neato. So from the point of view of it being on a single platform, Neato does that back end with Xero on the accounting, but effectively that's just bank recs and getting profit and loss and so on. But from the daily point of view, we use Neato, and it plugs into a lot of other sort of add-ons that we've been using, and we've got some really. And we have actually in the last couple of years connected with a couple of really good partners in
like shipping and all that type of thing.
Shipping, well, certainly our couriers. We've got a really good setup with courier companies, and we've got some great pricing. We've got good relationships. One of our guys, we're very fortunate enough, used to have a courier franchise, is pretty experienced in that area, and that's been crucial for us. It's
been a cost that. Every person I've spoken to on this podcast has been ravaged by costs associated with delivering the products that they're selling. It's been amazing. Freight. We know freight from overseas. If you're bringing stuff in, every container's cost triple what it used to. What it cost. I don't know, a year ago. Even during COVID, it's triple from then. So it's having access to good couriers and good systems like that is important.
Yeah. So we pretty much stick to sort of two couriers. We use Australia Post, obviously, because Australia Post there are so many areas in Australia, and we send to every corner that couriers just won't deliver to. So you have to use Australia Post, and they were sending out weekly or almost monthly emails. We're behind, and this is the reason, and we had to pass that information on. So there's a lot of understanding, but once again, it came back to communication. And we have our other courier. They're now called Aramax, but we're Fastway couriers. Are our main go-tos, and they generally did a pretty good job. But even the couriers experience a lot of problems, and most of the problems were around just not delivering stock or losing parcels and that sort of thing, which I'm sure...
Losing parcels.
Losing parcels.
Let me see the other side of the road getting shit-faced.
Yeah, well, that's... I think there's a little bit of that might have come into it, but so but interesting. Like we're talking about pricing and pricing going up and so on. We've only just started experiencing that in the last 3 or 4 months, where basically everything's been going up. The line has been pretty well held during that last 2 or 3 years, but now everything's shooting up, like all of our costs. And so, so that's just something that we're going to see everywhere. Yeah,
for sure. All the government stimulus funds from every different government across the world, mixed with the lockdowns, you've got this enormous amount of demand that's been driven by all this extra government cash. And then you've got the lockdowns, which destroyed supply globally. You got, too many dollars chasing too few goods, and you've got heavy inflation, and that's why everything's gone nuts.
Yeah, and I think just the cost of shipping is probably a huge impact on this, because a lot of the product does come from overseas, and I don't know what in terms of what's going on in Ukraine, but malt is a major ingredient to beer, and those guys grow a lot of malt and wheat over there. So I don't know, I do know
fertilizer.
Raw materials are going through the roof.
I was having a look. I was having a look at the US inflation figures, not only from a consumer price index but also the producer price index. And the consumer price index, I think, is 8.9% there, and the producer price index is 10.9. So, and the producer always comes before the consumer. So that's what we would expect to see from a consumer perspective. So it's going to get dearer and dearer and dearer to do everything. But I guess do you guys would just incorporate that into your standard pricing, or do you absorb that, or because it's very, very, very hard to absorb that?
You might have. I've just heard myself sigh into the microphone. It's a tricky one. We don't approach it like that, to just do it like, okay, the price has gone up 10%. We've got to pass that on. And that's what we do. We're in a sort of, the way we think about our business is we're like a community of people, and a community of brewers, and we're in it because we love it. We do it because we love to share it. We do it because we love to share it with our friends. And so, well, I guess what we try and do is, there's no precedence to this, but I don't want to have that hard approach to pricing. Where we can actually have some flexibility, we will do that. And where we think, that it mightn't work, so we kind of almost look at it at, or not potentially product by product, but sort of category by category. And then where is it we might have an advantage in terms of supply or sourcing, so that we don't have to do like a standard 10% on all product. I mean, that'd be easy. It'd take much less time, but we're in it for the long haul, and our relationship with our customers are crucial. So we may be taking less on some product, and we might have a little bit extra room on others. So it's a bit nuanced how we're approaching the pricing. And, of course, we've really got to be aware of the data and all that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've got your options of passing on that cost, but then you think to yourself, is that going to affect scale? Because potentially it might piss off customers and that type of thing, which, in your business, your customers are your everything. So being able to on charge those costs may affect scale, or you can just focus on the scale side of things, keep your customers happy. And that's probably more so what you guys do, right? You focus more heavily on the customer to make sure the customer keeps purchasing. And if the customer keeps purchasing, usually scale looks after margins on its own.
Yeah, there is that. And there are other things in terms of, like, for example, which platform do you sell on? So we sell on our own website. We sell on marketplaces like eBay. We sell direct to the consumer in store. So it's interesting when you look at marketplaces. It's been such a fantastic phenomenon, because they've got millions of customers and you've got access to them, but you don't own that relationship with the customer. The platform or eBay owns that relationship. So
it also owns part of your margin as well, right?
It owns part of your margin. So I'm happy to what we want to do is that when they come direct to us, that they're always going to be better off than going to the marketplace. So if they're in the marketplace, they can find us, they can discover us, they can buy from us. It's still a very good price, good deal. If they choose to buy, that's great. But really what we want to do is have that direct relationship with the customer. And I think for us, there's been a big shift, because a few years ago, the buzzword was marketplace, certainly in our in sector and other sectors. But I think what has happened in this lockdown period is those that have had scalability on their own websites have seen the huge benefits from that. And we certainly were prepared. At that time, I remember we just launched a brand new site, and then not long after that, this whole sort of lockdown thing happened. And so then marketplaces became a whole lot less important to us, because we couldn't service them as well as we could service our direct customer, and our direct customers were way more important because we didn't own that relationship. Mm-hmm. So marketplace is still a very important part of what we do, but we're way more excited about our direct relationship with the customer. And of course, the nature of business has changed hugely since before and after the lockdown. Yeah. You spoke before about being offering small batch brewing packs. Mm. Now, can you give me a bit of a rundown on what the difference is between brewing small batch and brewing, a larger volume? Number one, and number two, if you could please run me through the exact process of taking the raw materials, what equipment you would need to put them into from a small batch brewing perspective, and what the process is from there to be able to produce the end product. Oh, it's a really good question. So the first thing I'd say is I've never been a large batch brewer. So brewers who might be listening to this, I'm pretty sure that most of them have been small batch brewers, and they've gone into the large batch brewing, and that's where they found their passion. So I've always been in what we call, I guess, the home brewing, but the small batch is what we like to call it. So Australia's pretty unique. Australia's pretty unique in our sort of history on home brewing. So Cooper's brewery started up, I believe they started in the early 80s or maybe even the late 70s with effectively wort kits that they came out with. So malt extract that wasn't fermented, that was made in the brew house, and they simply added yeast to these. I think they might have even come in plastic bags back in those days in a box. And back in, I might be getting my history a little bit out, but back in the 80s sometime, they came out with the malt extract can, the famous sort of Cooper's can that used to be available in the supermarket and so on. And that's where a lot of our brewing culture came from. So we've got a lot to thank the Cooper's guys in South Australia, and really introduced our industry to easy access brewing. And so from there, has developed is a real culture around making beer with home brewing using malt extract, which is essentially the mash grain and the concentrated wort, where you then use it, you add water back in and your ingredients to make beer. So I really think here in Australia, and perhaps places like New Zealand, where Lion Nathan does have a very high quality malt extract plant in Dunedin, and they make products for home beer making, brands such as Blackrock and Beer Makers, which are not commercial brands, but they're home brewing brands. The quality of the product is so high that it's just so easy to make really high quality craft beer, if you like, in small batches. We're talking, say, 20 litres. If we were to compare that over to the US, there's been the culture that there was never really a great malt extract option like what Cooper's had developed here. So their industry and their sort of DNA in this area was always all grain brewing, and which has effectively making a mash from a crushed grain, adding the hops, and every beer, of course, it's got the same ingredients: malt, hops, yeast, and water. And so they've got a massive sort of industry in from grain, brewing from grain products.
Is that just due to the quality of the Australian homebrew? Is that a better quality purely because of the access to the base products, the access to the raw materials in comparison to the US, or is it just because of the culture around what base products and raw materials they use?
Yeah, that's another good question. I'm not entirely sure how to answer that, other than there are two, so Coopers and Lion Nathan through the Blackrock and the Beer Makers brand that are made in New Zealand. They're very high quality, high grade brewing malts. So obviously the key to making great beer, I always say, is you've got to start off with great quality ingredients. You've got to get the balance right in terms of the flavour of the malts and the hops and so on. You've got to use the right kind of yeast, which is the same yeast that would be used at commercial brewing, and it's got to be brewed at the right temperature. So you get all those elements right, you're going to make a fantastic high quality beer. Now around the world, there is another company over in the UK called Muntons. They make very high quality malt extract, but it's not prolific everywhere. So, yep.
How much of the malt and yeast that we would expect in our beers in Australia, how much of that is imported? Because I was talking to a gentleman by the name of Dermot from Beerco, and he was we were talking about the supply chain problems. This is about 3 or 4 months ago, and he was of the opinion that, and he was talking about how the fact that a lot of this stuff needs to be imported and is imported, and that's one of the issues around the supply chain, was the fact that we didn't have access to some of these materials at scale in Australia. Can you comment on that?
Well, I imagine Dermot's been talking about actual grain, so as opposed to malt extract.
Okay.
I'm assuming. So we do grow. Whilst I'm not an expert in that in the grain industry, a lot of our high grade brewing malts are grown here, but then a lot come from overseas, places like Germany, the UK, the US. Those kind of places where they do grow a very high quality malt, and they're used in a lot of different beers here. In terms of extract, that is manufactured here in Australia or over in New Zealand, but I imagine they would also use imported grains as well. But of course we grow our own, so it'd be the same with the hops too. Australia has some amazing varieties of hops: Galaxy, Ella, Eclipse, grown by Hop Products Australia in Victoria and in Tasmania. But then there are so many hops.
There's certain types though, right? They're like everything grown in the world, each region has its own characteristics.
Well, they do, but also they have proprietary over these products, so they've developed them themselves, so no one else is allowed to grow them. So hops are sort of pretty much owned. So the US has their own varieties, New Zealand does, the UK and Europe as well. And so it's very easy to get access to those products because they come in a pelletized form, very easy to ship, and so you can replicate any beer style because of it. Hops is such a wonderful creative canvas to work with. I mean, all the conversations I've had, that seems to be the key trigger or key element that it really defines a lot of what a beer becomes. And the amount of the amount of differentiation across all the different, I guess I'll call them Skews, but you can call them whatever you want, is just unbelievable. The fact that something can be slightly different and produces a completely different end product. Yeah, it does. And also blending them, that's a lot of fun too. You know, so I've got my own particular. I really love Galaxy and Ella as a combination hop. They're two Tasmanian grown hops, and they do produce that big fruity, citrusy, punchy beers. and which are effectively if that it's that sort of Pacific style. So I just love Stone and Wood Pacific Ale. It's very simple, very sessionable beer. It's got that big fruity taste. They use the Galaxy hops, and so we're constantly developing new recipes, and we use a lot of those Australian hops. And people we spoke about before, hazes and so on, but they love the big fruity beers. That's definitely a massive trend. And using combinations of wheat malts and barley malts. I don't know if we've gone off track on the conversation, but I was just I think it's I think that trend's going to stay for a long time.
Yeah, cool.
And something uniquely Australian, I believe.
So a couple of questions to finish off. So what's your favourite type of beer to have 2 beers of, and what's your favourite type of beer to have 6 beers of? I know that it's I often get a very different result from both.
Okay, so 6 beers, that's an interesting one. To me, it's not the beer, but it's more the occasion. So 6 beers, it's probably going to be Carlton Draft at the MCG. It's like, I would never buy a 4 and 20 pie, but if I'm going to buy, if at the MCG, the only pie I'm going to eat is a 4 and 20 pie.
There's something about those pie warmers there from the football. I went to the boxing the other night with the at where was it? It was at Telstra Dome. What's that called now? Marvel Stadium, and I had and I would never usually get a hot dog. It's just not really a thing that I would eat. But I had a hot dog at the boxing the other day, and it was outstanding. And then, but yeah, that's the only time I would also have a pie. So it's interesting you say that there.
Yeah. So I would never buy a Carlton Draft, but I do like a beer on tap, and I think it's an occasion beer for me. Maybe that fits right into their marketing of my age group and on the fact that I'm a male, etc.
There is something great about Carlton Draft on tap, though.
Yeah, I'll never forget my granddad. Every Saturday afternoon, he'd put on the radio, sit in the backyard, and have one tally or one long neck of Carlton Draft. I just love that kind of tradition when it comes to beer. So that'd be the 6 beer route, and I've done that certainly more than once. I certainly love being at the MCG. And what was the other question? It was about 2 beers.
2 beers, yeah.
It would depend on where I was, but I think a winter in Melbourne, if I was in a pub that had lots of variety and choice, I'd probably go for like a chocolatey sort of porter or stout.
Who would be the kind of producer of that in Australia?
Well, actually, me. I've got a porter that we call it double choc porter, and it's got like chocolate essence in it and chocolate grain and just lots of malty goodness. Not too bitter. It's actually the favourite porter that I've ever had. But do you know what? I couldn't tell you that. I'm opportunistic. I'd see it on a tap and I'd try it.
Yep.
So I love that. So I'm just thinking, it's pretty cold at the moment. That'd be something really nice to have. But look, any beer that's in flavour, it has flavour and it's balanced. I do like the fruity stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. To finish off, where do you see the home brewing market going? I mean, I've been reading recently and the scale that the home brewing market has seen in the last 24 months has been extraordinary. Where do you see the market in, say, 24 months from now and then into the future? I think it's going to grow heavily as it has been, and e-commerce is going to just support that.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the whole. I think almost you've got to go back to. There's 2 elements of it. We've got the craft, the whole sort of explosion of education around craft beer, and then you've got the DIYs, and then DIY is such a big thing now, so it's all part of that. And then you've got the e-commerce side. It's just such an easy product to ship because, as we spoke about before, you're not shipping water. You're actually shipping the ingredients and you're adding your own water. So it's really, you can do it anywhere. So I think that whilst our people's tastes have changed, with the development of craft beer, and the fact that you could actually easily replicate any kind of beer at home, and then we are now much more. There's much more opportunity to buy online from good retailers, good businesses. So I really think I'm seeing this as an industry that's going to grow online at rates much higher than other comparable industries, because it's just such an easy and ideal product to ship. And because there's not a store on every corner, it's not like you can go to Coles and you can buy this stuff that can replicate that. So I think it's a sort of a two-pronged story, but a lot of it is around that e-commerce and that communication and that sort of critical connection with customers. They don't have to be in your space for you to be able to look after them. And I think that's it'll definitely continue to grow in that area. And we're seeing, a huge chunk of our sort of business is now online. Yeah.
I had this theory, which I was thinking about a couple of weeks ago, which is around getting home brewing kits and kind of a venue or something like that, actually white labeling a home brewing kit and being able to brew their own beer and package their own beer and sell it on premises. And I kind of think that commercially that would make a lot of sense as well. It's just a theory, but I think there's a wholesale market in home brewing. I think the ability to white label someone else's brew and to be able to brew that and sell that on your premises, I really think that's a market that one day will take off, because it happened in coffee about probably 7 or 8 years ago. A lot of the roasters started offering the venue, so the cafe. The cafe would go to a roaster and they would say, hey, I want to create my own brew and I want to be able to package it up so it's got all of my branding and stuff on it. And that was massive about 8 years ago. And now we see the vast majority of cafes are doing that now, where they picked whatever beans they want and then they package it up and it's got their branding and everything on it and they sell it on premises. I think in your market, I feel like there's no reason why that couldn't be a thing and wholesale couldn't take off in your space. And I think that it is slightly different to what everyone's used to, but I think it's a future market.
Are you sort of referring to something like real sort of micro batches, like maybe 50 or 100 litres that they would make themselves or get someone else to make for them and put them into a can and then just have their label on it in their stores? I think that's certainly happening on a larger scale, but people are probably doing it on 500, 1,000 litres or 1,500 litres. But if you're talking about like a restaurant owning its own product and having a 50-litre batch or a 100-litre batch and how we can make that scalable, I think there's something...
Does that make commercial sense for them? I mean, what will be the total cost, including labour? I mean, I know it's hard to put your finger on. Total cost, including labour, to produce, say, I don't know, 50 litres of beer, which might be, call it 2 cases or thereabouts.
Yeah, 50 litres of beer. So
actually, 50 litres of beer would be, about 4 cases, right?
Yeah.
Thereabouts.
Yeah, so a case is only about 8.5 litres, so it'd be...
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, like, you're talking about a slab, if you like?
Yeah.
The missing piece in this puzzle for me is understanding the wet taxes, because obviously they'd have to pay alcohol tax on it. But I think people would definitely be prepared to, if it was done right and there was a much loved restaurant or local place, and I think people would be prepared to pay potentially.
Yep.
But it'd be, I'm sure you'd be able to pull it off. There's certainly, what's interesting about the type of equipment that's coming out now. So on small scale, there's a great brand called Grainfather, which we're one of the first people to introduce it into Australia.
That's a fantastic name as well.
Grainfather, yeah Grainfather. So they're an unbelievable Kiwi mob that they've created these fantastic all-grain beer products, which is, the whole concept is around brewing exactly how a commercial brewery does, but on a small scale. So using the stainless steel and the all-in-one grain systems and so on. So and that's now scaled up to 70 litre type batches and fermentations. So whether it's commercially viable, but there's certainly that micro scale is creeping up, and you can brew on these small scales without having to plumb the place and do everything else related to it.
Yep. Possibly
that's where people who are, really sort of out there creating their own sort of trend, that the equipment will be there, and whether there's the opportunity to do it, well, that'd be the next phase. But I think I certainly can see it as possible to do.
Yeah. I mean, if it made commercial sense from a I guess a per can wholesale cost, then I see it as a nice branding exercise. But mate, thanks so much. That was a really good chat. Really enjoyed it. Is there anything that you want to finish off with? And where can people find you? AustralianHomebrewing.com.au?
Yeah, AustralianHomebrewing.com.au. We're in Oakley South in Melbourne, but we're on the phone all day, every day. We'd love to help, or if you had any questions, feel free to contact us. But yeah, that's our website. You'll be able to see it there. Yeah.
Spectacular. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Tim. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Okay, bye.